The story of bird evolution, well, it's always changing, isn't it? Always full of these twists and turns.
Yes, yeah.
Think you've got a handle on it, and then boom, a new fossil pops up and makes you rethink everything.
Mm.
And that's pretty much the story with a creature called Aurornis, Stewie. It definitely ruffled some paleontological feathers.
It really did. So today, yeah, we're doing a deep dive into this fascinating fossil, Aurornis scui. We'll look at the science papers, the news coverage it got, and how scientists have wrestled with where exactly it fits.
Right. Our mission, if you like, for this deep dive is to figure out what Aurornis tells us about that huge transition from dinosaurs to birds. We'll look at the controversies, why it's been so tricky to classify, and, why it all matters.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, the discovery itself.
Right. So the story kicks off in Yaluguo, which is in western Liaoning, China. It's a really famous area for fossils.
Oh, yeah.
And the Aurornis fossil itself, it was actually bought from a local dealer initially. Now, that detail becomes kind of important later, but the information at the time was that it came from the Taijishan Formation.
Okay, the Tirishan Formation. And that's late Jurassic, right? Around 160 million years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Initially dated to the late Jurassic, yeah.
Yeah.
About 160 million years old, which is, well, incredibly old.
Mind-bogglingly old. And the name, Aurornis sui, sounds significant.
It really is. Aurornis, that comes from aurora in Latin, meaning dawn, and ornis, Greek for bird. So dawn birds.
Dawn bird, nice.
And Zui honors Su Jing, a really prominent Chinese paleontologist who's done, well, just incredible work on feathered dinosaurs.
A fitting tribute. So a dawn bird, potentially older than Archaeopteryx, but you mentioned a potential issue with where it came from. Some uncertainty crept in.
That's right. Yeah, not long after the first paper came out, Pascal Godefroy, who led the research, actually raised some concerns himself. It was reported in Science magazine that there was a chance the fossil wasn't from the Taijishan Formation after all. It might have come from the Yixian Formation, which is younger, maybe around 125 million years old.
Ah, and the Yixian is also famous for early birds, isn't it? So that age difference is pretty critical.
Hugely critical, yeah. If it's from the younger Yixian, it doesn't necessarily predate Archaeopteryx. And that was a big part of the initial excitement.
So how are they planning to sort that out, to figure out its true age?
Well, Godefroy and his team plan to do more tests, mineralogical and botanical analyses, basically looking at the rock matrix around the fossil itself.
Okay.
The idea was to find a sort of geological fingerprint, maybe some fossil plant bits, that could definitively say which formation it belonged to. They plan to publish those results to clear things up.
So a bit of a geological puzzle layered on top of the paleontological one.
Exactly. Now let's talk about the animal itself. What did this Aurornis actually look like?
Yes, let's get into the creature itself, because the origins are intriguing, but the animal...
Wow. Okay, so picture something roughly the size of a pheasant today. About 50 centimeters, maybe 20 inches long.
Okay, pheasant-sized.
It had wings, yes, but, and this is key, the wings had claws. Proper claws.
Like Archaeopteryx.
Similar, yeah, a feature you see in those really early bird relatives. And it also had a long, bony tail. Very different from the short, fused tails modern birds have.
Right, so a real mix of features, some very dinosaur-like, some more bird-like. What about the rest of the skeleton?
Well, its leg bones looked a bit like Archaeopteryx's legs,
Yeah.
but overall, the whole skeleton, it was considered more primitive. It kept more features that you'd associate with its non-avian dinosaur ancestors.
More primitive overall anatomy. Got it. And the feathers. That's always the big headline with these finds.
Absolutely. And the fossil did preserve traces of feathers. They were described as downy feathers, found along the tail, the chest, and the neck area.
Downy feathers. For insulation, maybe?
Probably, yeah. Interestingly, these traces weren't obvious right away when they first got the fossil. They were found during the preparation process, carefully cleaning the rock away. And importantly, the researchers were confident they weren't fakes or added later. They seemed authentic.
That's crucial. So a feathered dinosaur, possibly older than Archaeopteryx. You can see why that caused such a stir. And initially it was classified as a basal avian. Can you break down what basal avian means for us?
Sure. So avialae is the big group that includes all birds, living birds, extinct birds, and their absolute closest dinosaur relatives. Basically, dinosaurs closer to birds than to, say, velociraptors or other groups.
Okay.
Basal just means it's positioned near the root or the base of that avialae family tree. It branched off early on.
Like an early twig on the bird branch?
Exactly. The 2013 study suggested Aurornis might be the most basal, the earliest diverging avian known back then. and crucially, older than Archaeopteryx.
Wow, that would literally rewrite the first page of the bird evolution story.
Pretty much, yeah. But as often happens in science, that first interpretation didn't remain the final word.
No, I suspected not. This is where the debate really heats up, right?
It absolutely does. Placing Aurornis sparked a lot of discussion, and different studies using phylogenetic analysis came up with different results.
Phylogenetic analysis that's building the evolutionary family tree based on shared features.
You got it. It's complex, using computers to analyze hundreds of anatomical details to see who's most closely related to whom. The more features shared, likely the closer the relationship.
So what did these other analyses suggest? Where else did scientists try to place Aurornis?
Well, a big one came in 2014. A study by Steve Bruzat and his colleagues reached a very different conclusion.
Okay.
Their analysis actually kicked Aurornis out of AVLA altogether.
Out of the bird group. Where did they put it?
They found it was more closely related to a group called troodontids. These are non-avian theropod dinosaurs. Specifically, they grouped it with things like Aurornis, Schottingia, and Eosinopteryx.
Whoa, that's a massive shift. From maybe the earliest bird relative to something more like Aurornis. What led to that change?
It often comes down to which anatomical characters you include in the analysis, how you score them, and the computational methods you use. Their data set and methods pointed towards stronger similarities with those troodontids.
Fascinating how different approaches yield such different family trees. Did the story change again after that?
Oh yes, it kept evolving. In 2017, there was a reevaluation of a famous Archaeopteryx specimen, the Harlem specimen.
Right.
And that study suggested Aurornis was actually an Anchiornithid.
An Aurornithid, so part of the family that Anchiornis belongs to.
Exactly, Anchiornithidae.
Yeah.
So still in that broader group of very bird-like feathered dinosaurs, maybe closely related to the bird lineage, but not necessarily a direct ancestor within Aviale itself, sort of a close cousin.
Okay, so still in the neighborhood, evolutionarily speaking, but then there was even a suggestion it wasn't a distinct species at all.
Right. That came up in a couple of studies around 2017 and 2019. The idea proposed was that Aurornisui might just be a junior synonym of Anchiornis huxley.
Junior synonym, meaning?
Meaning it's actually the same species that already had a name, Anchiornis. In taxonomy, the older name usually wins out. So the Aurornis fossil might just be another individual of Anchiornis.
So the features seen in Aurornis just represent variation within the Anchiornis species.
That was the argument, yeah.
Yeah.
That its characteristics sort of fall within the expected range you'd see across different Anchiornis specimens.
Wow. Okay. So from potential dawn bird to maybe just another Anchiornis, that really highlights how tough this is. And it brings us right back to that core question. What even is a bird at this stage? Aurornis seems to sit right in that blurry zone.
You've absolutely nailed it. That's why classifying it was called contentious, because our definition of bird, especially when you're looking this far back, isn't set in stone.
There's that quote about the gray dividing line, isn't there?
Yes, from Paul Barrett at London's Natural History Museum. He said these finds really show how gray the dividing line is between birds and non-avian dinosaurs. He talked about this gradation in features that makes it incredibly difficult to draw a sharp line. And he pointed out, that historically, Archaeopteryx was often the benchmark for defining bird.
Right. So if your definition relies on Archaeopteryx, anything slightly different or potentially earlier is bound to cause debate.
Precisely. And Lawrence Whitmer, another expert, called the initial Aurornis analysis compelling, but also stressed how similar all these early feathered species were.
Like a period of evolutionary experimentation?
Kind of, yeah. He said something like, all these little feathered species running and flapping around were all very similar. It suggests the boundaries we try to draw now were much fuzzier back then.
And Louis Chappe had a specific anatomical point, didn't he? About the arms.
He did. He argued that maybe Aurornis's forelimbs, its arms, were just a bit too short to really classify it as a true bird in his view. Very bird-like, definitely, but maybe not quite over that specific threshold he considered important.
So it really depends which features you prioritize when drawing that line. It's not just flipping a switch from dinosaur to bird.
Not at all. It's a spectrum.
This whole idea reminds me of Gregory S. Paul's pro-avian concept from way back, before Aurornis was even found.
Ah, yes. Dinosaurs of the Air, his 2002 book. Paul tried to predict, based on evolutionary logic, what a direct bird ancestor this pro-avian might have looked like.
What was his reasoning?
Well, he figured they probably weren't exclusively tree dwellers, because arms needed to get longer for climbing before they could become wings for flight. He built this hypothetical model.
And what did his hypothetical pro-avian look like? What features did he predict?
He envisioned something with a long neck, short body, long fingers, maybe opposable digits for grasping, different jobs for front and back limbs, no propatagium, that's the skin flap on the front of a bird's wing, a shallow tail, small size overall, and of course, feathers, probably for insulation first, then later adapted for flight. He even drew detailed pictures.
That's quite specific for a prediction.
Yeah.
And the connection to Aurornis.
It's uncanny, really. When Aurornis was announced, Andrea Cao, an Italian paleontologist, immediately noted the uncanny resemblance between the actual fossil and Pohl's theoretical Proavis.
Wow.
It was like, here's a fossil that seems to embody many of the features Paul predicted over a decade earlier based on theoretical grounds. One of those really neat moments in science.
Yeah, that is incredible. Where prediction meets discovery. Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. What are the main takeaways from this deep dive into Aurornis?
Okay, first, Aurornis is definitely this amazing feathered dinosaur. It's from the late Jurassic, probably, although that exact age is still a bit debated.
Right.
Second, it's got this fascinating mix of features, some dinosaur-like, some bird-like, sharing traits with Archaeopteryx. Third, its classification is really debated. Is it a basal bird? Is it a troodontid? Is it an anchorynthid? Is it even just another Aurornis? And that debate itself is maybe the biggest takeaway. It highlights just how complex and gradual the dinosaur-bird transition was. Evolution isn't neat boxes. It's messy. It's fluid.
So Aurornis really forces us to grapple with the definition of bird itself at that stage.
Absolutely. It exposes the limits of our categories when faced with the reality of evolutionary intermediates.
And why is this important for us, for you listening? What's the bigger significance?
Well, Aurornis and fossils like it, they give us concrete proof of how gradual evolution is. It wasn't dinosaur one day, bird the next.
Right.
It was this long, winding road with all sorts of creatures experimenting with feathers, flight, and different body plans. These fossils blur the lines we draw, and that's incredibly important for understanding the true nature of life's history. They show us evolution in action, caught in the fossil record.
It's a fantastic reminder that nature doesn't always fit into the neat categories we create. Aurornis sui, whatever its final label, gives us this incredible window into bird origins, even amidst all the scientific back and forth.
Definitely. And maybe that leads to a final thought for you to consider. Think about how discovering new things, especially in fields like paleontology, forces us to reconsider our definitions, our categories. What other lines that we think are clear-cut in science or even elsewhere might actually be much blurrier than we assume?
That's a great point. It encourages you to keep exploring, keep questioning, just like the paleontologists studying these amazing fossils.